Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures. Today is February 6, 2025. If you are new to this committee and you haven't participated in the past, welcome. And if you have been on this committee in the past, welcome back. I'll refresh, and again, I may have to go over some territory that for you veterans of the committee. I'm sorry, I had some interference back there. I'll go over some material just for introductory purposes, and forgive me if you've heard it all before, but I just want to make sure that everyone's up to speed where we're at. Again, this is a Citizens Advisory Committee for Capital Expenditures. The City of St. Louis has a Capital Improvements Committee, it's a 9-member board. I serve as Budget Director. My name is Paul Payne. I'm the Budget Director for the city. I serve as Chair of the Capital Committee, and the capital budget process is one which parallels the city's budget process. Our fiscal year begins July 1 to June 30, and right now we're in the process of preparing our operating budget. But because of capital, the nature of capital being more infrastructure related, and the sources are different, and we always look for input on that. And this Citizen Advisory Committee is one means of input to the Capital Committee, which in itself is an advisory committee to the elected officials who make ultimate decisions. That elected officials being our Board of Estimate and Apportionment and the Board of Aldermen. So what happens is we need to gather information and recommendations from the Citizen Advisory Committee. We also have a Complete Streets Committee, which also makes recommendations to the Capital Committee, and those things are formulated by March so that we can get a proposal to the Board of E&A for its proposed budget in the month of April. So what I'd like to do is just give you a little bit more of introductory information as well. I'm going to share my screen a bit, and if I can get that where we have share screen. Let's see here. Which one do I want to pull up here? Or this screen here. Yep. Okay. I wanted to give you, if you have not been to the city's website, there are a number of documents that you should probably familiarize yourself with. There's obviously the capital improvements budget document, which is on the Budget Vision website. And I also do a summary of a summary of the capital budget itself. And I call it the Capital Improvements Budget Guide. It's also posted there on our website. I'm also leaving it on the Capital Committee's website as well. If you have not been there, I recommend you visit there. And this sort of summarizes what we have in any given year, sources and uses of funds for capital planning, the criteria we use to evaluate projects, which are stated there, and then the various assets under the city, and then also what the current which is our fiscal 25, which ends in June 30th. If you recall, last year, for those who were here, we had a significant increase in capital improvement funding due to some prior year surplus amounts and those allocations. You'll see what the sources of revenue are for capital. And there's the half-cent sales tax capital allocation and other sources of funds. And as you can see, the largest source we had last year was the half-year operating surplus. And then, as well as some other sources of capital, which do not come through the Capital Committee, but are other sources of appropriations. One large one being the general obligation funds that are done through financings through the property tax. And then also listed under the uses, you can see all of our existing capital appropriations for the current fiscal year, and particularly the list of the projects that we had appropriations for. Now we're working on getting reports to show you that hopefully we can develop, and they're working with the new accounting system to show the progress in these various allocations that were made in the prior year. But if you need a refresher on what those were, these can be found both in the capital improvements budget, which is online, as well as this capital improvement guide. And you can see all the lists of projects that were approved in the current fiscal year. And for those that are multi-year and that we'd like to discuss in more detail, we will be bringing in departments and we can talk about those, which they can give you an update on where they are with multi-year projects and such. So that's a document. Again, that is posted online. It may help you if you're not familiar with the capital process, or if you are and you want to refresh your memory about what we've appropriated in the past. It's available. And so let me just highlight. And this is we had a capital committee meeting itself last Monday of this past week, earlier this week. And I wanted to share with you a document that I shared with them, and it sort of gives the nuts and bolts of the funding scenario for what we're looking ahead to be FY26. And this is a typical layout. I'll sort of, let's see if I can get it larger. Everybody can read it. It's a side-by-side comparison of the sources and uses of funds as we preview what we will have available in FY26 capital budget for FY26. And you can see here on the last year, FY25, which is the current fiscal year that we're in, we had a total allocation of $81 million. That was a pretty significant amount over and above the usual amount, simply because the biggest source there was the $35.9 million in prior year surpluses. By ordinance, anytime we have an operating surplus, being that it's one-time surplus, half of that goes to capital improvements. And so that's why we had a significant increase. Now, we did have a surplus last year, but it was not as large. And so you can see in FY26, that surplus is one half of that surplus was $21.2 million. And as we go further in talking about it, that's still a pretty healthy amount, but it's less than what we had in the prior year. And for people who have been around the capital budget for a long time, I can tell you often there are many years in which that we either don't have a surplus at all, or we have just a small amount. So we've been blessed to have some additional capital funds in the last few years, but I do not, particularly with this year being tighter, I would not expect that to be the case in FY27 looking ahead. So let me start at the top. The largest recurring source of revenue we have for the capital budget is the half-cent capital sales tax. It's current fiscal year, we've seen a little decline, though it's pretty close. I do not anticipate on growth into next year, fiscal 26, under 1%. That would be just under $23 million, and I've got it at $22,969,000. Some additional sales taxes we have for capital involve the Metro Parks District. Of the 1/10 cent sales tax for Metro Parks, the city itself receives half of those receipts. So the amounts that you see here at $2.1 million is 50% of the proceeds. The other half goes to the regional parks, which is a regional district that they use for regional parks projects. The 3/16 cent sales tax, which is also for Metro Parks, the city receives 40% of those proceeds, and that would amount to $3.2 million in this coming fiscal year. The economic development sales tax, which is a half-cent sales tax for economic development projects, 10% of that is allocated to the capital fund.
No, I will for the next meeting.
If you could mute yourself, we can hear some noise in the background, please. So we've got $2.4 million is estimated for that sales tax next year. Now, every year, we also assess where the revenues are in the current fiscal year. Now, last year, we did have a beginning balance for the economic development sales tax, so we appropriated that. We do not anticipate that this year. So this would be unspent prior year appropriations that we appropriated in FY25, which would not recur. The sales tax was also in a deficit situation on last year. It's pretty close.
City Advisory Council.
It's pretty close this year, so I'm not assuming any negative beginning balance. Just to let you know, when we're all basing capital revenues on budget on estimates going forward. If those revenue estimates fall short in any given year, because it's a capital project, we don't go back and take money from that capital project. What we typically do is say, all right, if we're short on revenue this year, we will reduce next year's revenue estimate accordingly in order to keep the capital fund, which is a multi-year process, in balance. So that's why you had negative adjustments last year. Although the third quarter is still pending, right now I'm not assuming any negative or positive. Occasionally that's a positive balance, but we're just not assuming any beginning balance in the current and looking ahead to FY26. The half-year prior operating surplus, which I talked about before, estimated at 21. Well, that's an actual number of the FY24 operating balance, which is 21.2 million. That's going to be the biggest source of our discretionary monies in FY26. As I get down to the uses, I'll explain that a lot of the recurring sources are allocated already by ordinance. So this is what we're primarily going to be focusing on. We have some other miscellaneous sources. Courthouse restoration funds are targeted to courthouse improvements. Gaming revenues, which actually have declined this year, and we're going to see a decline offsetting for a deficit in the current fiscal year, as well as decline in balance for the coming fiscal year. So it should be $180,000. Gasoline tax revenues, last year we appropriated a balance. So this year is going to be less, about $5.3 million, and that's going to be allocated by the nature of the fact that it's a gasoline tax is allocated to streets and bridge improvements. And then we also have some debt service payments from we're obligated to pay out of the capital, and we source those through general fund transfers to the capital fund. And that's what most of these other items are. And then the allocation piece, you can see existing debt payments, those are obligations that we have to pay. That's $7.2 million. We know road and bridge improvements will be about $5.3 million, matching the gasoline tax estimated revenues. And then the economic development sales tax piece, the bulk of those monies go to our NGA obligations, our NGA financing obligations, and then whatever's left over from whatever comes in the economic development sales tax we've been allocating to Soulard Market. We have some smaller amounts allocated for building improvements and equipment. But the big discretionary piece that we would probably be focusing on in FY26 is going to be this $21.2 million. And that's what we would be looking at when we start talking about the inventory. The rest of the capital budget, mostly from the half-cent sales tax and the Metro Park sales tax, is $10.8 million for the ward accounts. They get 50% of the half-cent sales tax, and those are allocated by the alderman working with the streets and Board of Public Service for projects within the wards. There's $8.9 million or almost $9 million for parks and major and neighborhood parks. This comes from a share of the half-cent sales tax as well as those Metro Park taxes I talked about. Recreation center improvements gets 3% of the half-cent sales tax. And then the police department improvements gets 10% of the half-cent sales tax. So those are all allocated by ordinance. So again, most of our discretionary revenues when it comes to capital is going to be this $21.2 million. And there'll be a little bit extra from the building improvements and equipment. But that's going to be most of our limitation on what is discretionary versus what is allocated by ordinance. So we want to keep that in mind when we go through these needs, the inventory needs. And as you know, whether you've been on this committee before or are new to it, do not be surprised that we've got a significant backlog of capital needs. And so this is all we have to allocate for this purpose. So it's a matter of identifying priorities and trying to address as much as we can given our limited revenues. So any questions on that, let me know. Anyone have any questions on that before we actually get into the capital needs inventory? Okay, great. So moving from that, let's go to the inventory itself. Oops, that's not the one. That's the one. And so, as if you have been with us in the past, we try to identify all our capital needs across the city. And of course, in this iteration, there's over $500 million worth of needs identified. We try to actually put them in categories of what the essentiality is by using critical, needed, and desirable. I think sometimes, given the limited amount of resources we have available, needed and desirable is more informational because we just don't have the ability to fund those type of things. And I've noticed sometimes there's bracket creep where things go into the critical column, which maybe because we can't consider them if they're needed or desirable. But anyway, we can all vet through that. And if you had questions about we'll go into that in more detail. But so from this point, what I'd like to do is introduce Rich Bradley. He's the president of the Board of Public Service for the city, the main engineering department for the city. And he could walk through most of these categories, just give you an overview of them. Again, in our future meetings, we will be going a little bit more in detail with individual departments on some of these. And so that will be to come. But I'll leave it to Rich to take it from here and just sort of go through the categories as they exist right now.
All right, Paul, thank you for the introduction and welcome to everybody on the committee. See a lot of faces we've seen before and some new ones, and welcome everybody. Glad to have you here. So the idea tonight is for me to take you on a relatively brief tour of the critical needs. As Paul mentioned, there's a little over $21 million that we will have as discretionary funding to put towards needs. So really going into the needed and desirable columns is not even worth the time to look at the moment. I do want to reiterate on top of something that Paul mentioned is that every year when we do this inventory list, we look at particularly the items in the critical. We drop off the items that were completed the year before, but then we look at the needed items and see if anything needs to move to critical, or we look at the desirable column and see if anything needs to move to desirable. I will tell you that sometimes throughout the course of a year, departments do fund, they have funding in their budget and they find some discretionary funding to fund some of these smaller items. So some of the items just naturally fall off the list because they're there. But generally the large items do not. So keep that in mind. And as Paul mentioned, you know, my rationale tonight is to walk through each category, try to give you a brief description and answer some questions. But we do have in upcoming meetings some presentations from some of the other individuals who will be, you know, detailed and be able to in-depth answer some questions if you really have them. And if you have a question that they do not answer or I do not answer, please let us know. Please let us know, and we'll be glad to look into it and try to get you a satisfactory answer before this committee adjourns in early March. So without further ado, you're looking at the front page of the capital needs inventory, as Paul said, 144 million in critical, 185 million in needed, 180 million in desirable, and about 10 million in total critical needs across the city. You can read the descriptions of how we get there, but generally the critical needed are things that we need to, you know, for our buildings, for our infrastructure, for our facilities. There are risks to public safety. Are there things that we absolutely need to, you know, keep our operations going every day? So they're broken out by different categories. So Paul, I will ask you if you will scroll to streets. Again, I'm just going to talk about the red ones because the critical ones are the ones we're focusing on. So as we start streets, I do want to preface this with a couple things. First of all, Many of these projects are grant-funded projects through our MPO, a Metropolitan Planning Organization, East-West Gateway. And so what you'll notice is that there's a total estimated project cost, and there is an estimated match cost for the city. So if it indicates in the column that we have a grant, that means that all we have to do is pay the match the share of funding for it, and the project gets completed. So generally, those grants are 80% funded by the feds and 20% funded by the city. Some vary a little bit. At times, we increase the match in order to increase our viability of receiving a grant, but generally, we try to get a grant with the lowest match share possible. The other thing that I will mention on this sheet is, and particularly for people who are back, you've not seen this the last time, there are items that are in green. They're highlighted in green letters. And so I want to talk about that for a minute because this is something new, but it's extremely important. So per ordinance 71882, the Complete Streets Ordinance, effective on August the 31st of 2024, the Complete Streets Advisory Committee, which was created and tasked with various transportation and mobility related responsibilities, recommends to the Capitals Committee on transportation and mobility related projects for inclusion and or prioritization in the capital improvement plan. And so those projects are listed in green here, and I will go through those. And generally, most of those are critical projects. There are a couple that are not. There are 9 recommendations from the Complete Streets Committee. So the first one on here is Cass Avenue Streetscape from Tucker to Grand. And so the description of that project is, let me get to that. I want to read some of these because I really want you to get the detail on them. Funding sufficient to complete the local match requirements for the planned Cass Avenue reconstruction project between Tucker Avenue and Grand Boulevard in the city of St. Louis. The city has applied for an East-West Gateway grant for STP, Surface Transportation Program funding, in 2025. In fact, we just applied within the last week for those. The remaining estimated cost currently underfunded by local match is $1.2 million. And so this is the complete reconstruction of Cass Avenue, Tucker Boulevard, and Grand to Grand. Top priority for the city of St. Louis. Portions of Cass Avenue, especially in proximity to the NGA West Complex and the Farmer Pruitt-Igoe site, are in severe disrepair and lack of basic elements like sidewalk. The entire corridor is in the top tier, top 10% of the city's roadway high injury networks. The draft design of the project would reconstruct much of the roadway, incorporating elements like a road diet, safer lane configurations, reconstructed and ADA compliant sidewalks, and wider multi-use path on the north side of the street. The project connects to housing and schools, will also integrate with funded projects like the Brickline Greenway on Grand Avenue and 20th Street cycle track. Partial funding has already been committed to the project in a prior budget years, but this allocation will complete the full necessary local funding match required for an STP grant. So the total estimated project cost is $21 million. And again, the local match share is 1.2. Okay. You want to go back to the needs summary? Can you bounce back, or do you just want me to walk through this way?
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So the next project on the list is the ADA transition plan implementation citywide. And again, I want to go through the details on that because it's extremely important. So the city of St. Louis adopted an ADA transition plan in early 2024. The plan helps prioritize activities and projects to improve accessibility and achieve ADA compliance over time within the right-of-way in city buildings and city services. Over the last 2 years, the city's annual budget has included a funding allocation for activities and projects identified in the plan. The funding has made improvements within the city facilities and parks, such as constructing accessible restrooms and accessible pathways. It's also been spent to expand the scope of existing roadway projects to include more sidewalk and curb ramp work. The funding recommendation requests the ADA transition plan funding for FY 26 to be $2.1 million, with some funding directed to standalone sidewalk and curb ramp projects identified as priorities in the ADA transition plan, and with locations to be determined by the Office of the Disabled and the Board of Public Service. All right. And by the way, at the end of this section, streets and bridges, I will stop and we'll see if there's any questions. The next priority on the list is number 5, and that is the River de Pere Boulevard improvements from Gravois to Lansdowne. That is also a complete streets recommendation. And so that is funding for the first phase of design and right-of-way related, as well as construction to the River de Pere Boulevard reconstruction project. The city of St. Louis has been awarded a surface transportation program grant for the project in 2024. This approximately $19.7 million project will largely reconstruct River de Pere Boulevard between Lansdowne and Gravois, adding a variety of typical safety features to the current substandard roadway. Safety features will include adequate lane widths, drainage improvements, pavement reconstruction, intersection modifications, guardrail, center medians, and improved bus stops. There are no significant impacts to the adjacent Greenway Trail. This funding allocation will only cover a portion of the initial design if we fund that, or that could fund the entire project if we fund the total amount. Additional funding to meet the local funding requirement will be necessary in the budget years. The $20,000 would be for the design if we opted to fund that, or it should be $3,460,000 for future years for the actual construction of the project and design if we funded it all at one time. All right. If you'll flip pages for me on to page number 3. And there's nothing on page number 3 in the red. If you go to page number 4, we have item number 16. This is arterial street paving for $10 million. So this is a earmark project. This is a placeholder project. If you are not aware of this, the city is doing about $30 million worth, $46 million worth of 30 miles of 5 corridors within the city of St. Louis, paving, roadway, ADA, traffic calming improvements via the ARPA program. And so this funding would be beyond that for additional arterial street paving that would be identified by the street department in the future. Our goal is to utilize all the ARPA funding first within the next 2 years. And then after all that funding is allocated to those projects, if there's any funding that is remaining, we will pave additional arterials. And on top of that, this would be for other arterial street paving within the city. So the location, the exact location has not been determined. It is a place marker. We could fund 10 million, we could fund 2 million, 5 million, whatever the funding source may be. But we know that we have a lot of arterial street paving well beyond $10 million that needs to be done. So again, this is a place marker for the street department. The underground lighting vaults within the city of St. Louis is another street department project. Just want to mention to you that previously this project was a $2 million project total. We funded 1 million of it previously through some other funding sources, capital and general obligation bond. So it is now down to $1 million. Basically what this is, these are underground structures whereby the electrical facilities that power the underground, the street lights in downtown are located underground. And these vaults are beyond their useful life. They're leaking, they get water. Some of them are collapsing. they need to be replaced in order to keep our lighting infrastructure downtown in place. And if you look in the comment side, there are 11 vaults. So we have roughly half of those funded to date. We're working on the design for those. This would fund the other half of those. The next item is 18, which is signal timing and detection. That is $1 million item. That also was originally a $2 million item, and we have previously funded $1 million through the capital budget. And basically what the description of that project is that is intersection traffic signal timing and detection. So I think the easiest way to explain that is there are a couple ways that signals are timed. They're either timed through a camera, which senses a vehicle that pulls up, and many of them have a loop detector or a puck that is actually embedded in the pavement, and magnetically it senses a vehicle there. And so many of those have gone bad. This is for major arterial streets. The first $1 million, again, is in design right now, and this would be the additional $1 million to complete the project for the street department. All right, if we go down to item number 21, this one is traffic management enhancements, phase 7, South Broadway from Marceau to Carroll, $10.5 million project with a local match share of 1.860 million. The design has been funded out of another funding source, and we have a CMAQ grant for that project. So I'll give you the description on that one. Funding sufficient to complete the local match requirements for the South Broadway Boulevard traffic enhancements phase 7. The city of St. Louis has been awarded via a congestion mitigation and air quality CMAQ program grant for the project in 2024 and needs to commit the remaining required local funding contribution. This approximately $10.5 million project would replace and modernize traffic signals and improve signalized intersection and ADA facilities at intersections through the South Broadway corridor from Broadway and Marceau to Broadway and Carroll Street. And as I mentioned, the remaining updated required local match funding is $1.860 million. The next item on the list is item number 22, and that is traffic management enhancements phase 8, and that is North Broadway from Cass to Riverview. That is a $7 million project with a local match share of 1.240 million. And the description on that is funding sufficient to complete the local match requirements for the planned North Broadway Boulevard traffic enhancements phase 8. The city of St. Louis has been awarded funding via congestion mitigation and air quality CMAQ program grant for this project in 2024 and needs to commit the remaining required local funding contribution. This approximately $7 million project would replace and modernize traffic signals and improve signalized intersections and ADA facilities at those intersections through the North Broadway corridor from Broadway and Cass to Broadway and Riverview. And as I mentioned, the remaining unfunded required local match share for this project is $1.240 million. The next critical item on the list, and also again, these are all, remind you, are all recommended by the Complete Streets Committee, traffic management enhancements phase 9, and that is Skinker from Canterbury to Etzel. That is a $12 million project with a $2.440 million local match share. The description for that project is funding sufficient for the initial local funding match requirements for the planned McCausland Skinker Boulevard traffic enhancements phase 9 project. The city of St. Louis has applied for a grant for congestion mitigation air quality program through East West Gateway. As I mentioned, we just did those about a week or so ago. This project would replace and modernize approximately 20 traffic signals and improve signalized intersections and ADA facilities through the corridor between Arsenal Street and Etzel, and evaluate lane changes and new sidewalk connections north of Rosedale. And the estimated local match funding for this project, and this one says to cover engineering, we could fund engineering for $400,000 or we could fund the entire local match share, which would be design and construction for 2.440 million. We have a couple options on that. We have a lag of about a year before we would need the construction funding. So depending on the availability of funding, we can fund one or both at this time. Item 24 is the Christie Boulevard cycle track and pedestrian improvements from Holly Hills to Kings Highway. This is a $3 million project with a $620,000 local match share. The description for that project is funding sufficient for the initial local match funding requirements for the planned Christie Greenway extension between Holly Hills and Kings Highway Boulevard along Christie Boulevard through Joseph Leisure Park and Christie Park. The city of St. Louis has applied for via East-West Gateway for funding for a transportation alternatives program grant, which is a TAP grant, and the estimated initial local match share required is $120,000. And again, that is if we want to fund the design for $120,000, or we would want to fund the design and construction for $620,000. Either way, we can break those funds out depending on the availability. Item 25 is bicycle facilities improvements, and that is a $1.2 million project that is not a grant project recommended by the Complete Streets Committee. It will be all locally funded by the city of St. Louis. And so the description in that is funding sufficient to improve pavement markings and features on the existing on-street bicycle facilities. Depending on the location, this will include restriping existing bike lanes, newer replacement durable thermoplastic bike lane symbols, and thermoplastic Shero updates to the city installed on bike facilities, which may have only conventional paint markings and added stock necessary features for certain bike facility elements like zebra delineators and flexible posts. The project may also include spot upgrades where feasible, such as enhanced crosswalk marking or green MMA pavement markings in needed areas in order to better maintain the expanding network of bicycle facilities in the city. Allocations for this category should be annually or periodically recurring, and that is a project for $1.2 million. And then if you would flip over to B Bridges, we just have 2 items on that list. I'll do those and then I will stop and we'll see what questions anybody may have. So we go to bridges. There are 73 bridges owned and maintained by the city of St. Louis. Generally, when we build bridges, we apply for an STPS, Surface Transportation Program grant. Again, these are funded 80% by the feds, 20% locally. We are doing very well with our bridges. We have funded a significant amount of bridge repair and replacement projects over the last handful of years. And so really what we're down to at the moment on bridges is just 2. The first one is the removal of the east vehicle approach at the MacArthur Bridge in East St. Louis. If you're not familiar with this, this is the old MacArthur Bridge that was turned over to the Terminal Railroad. And this is the eastern vehicle approach, which is around Tudor Avenue in East St. Louis. It is still owned by the city of St. Louis. What I will tell you is we are currently in a negotiation with the city of East St. Louis. The city of East St. Louis is very interested in us donating that structure and right of way to them. We have had many discussions about this. We're getting closer to getting this accomplished. Assuming that all happens, this $3 million item would fall off the list. The city of St. Louis could do whatever they want with that structure, whether they would want to utilize it for something, whether they want to demo it. It would be on them. It would be an ordinance which authorized it, and it would be a transfer of the right-of-way surface, subsurface, and above structure. So we're in the process of working on that. That's all I can tell you at the moment. And then finally, the last one from the Complete Streets Committee is the Old Stable Bridge on Theater Drive. And that description reads as follows. Funding sufficient for the initial local funding match requirements for the planned replacement of the old stable bridge on Theater Drive within Forest Park. This bridge is approximately 600 feet west of Pagoda Circle, crosses over one of the waterways in the park. The bridge is currently 103 years old and in need of replacement. And I'll remind you that the useful life of a bridge today is about 20 to 25 years. So I definitely believe we've gotten our money out of this one. The bridge is an off-system bridge, meaning that it is not on a major roadway. The project will seek funding from East-West Gateway from the Off-System Bridge Replacement and Rehabilitation Program, PRO fund. The total cost will be approximately $3 million. The funding for the initial design would be $120,000, or if we wanted to fund the design and construction, the local match share would be $760,000. So I'm going to take a breath and give you an opportunity to see if there's any questions you want to ask me about streets or bridges.
This is Kay Parrish. I have a question about the budget generally, and I'm new to the committee, so I apologize if everybody else knows the answers to this stuff. But these projects that are funded 80% by the feds, and I want to make sure I'm looking at this graph correctly. So when you say the estimated total project value, that's the total project value, and then the city match is what we're kind of looking at approving here. And should we, the rest of that is either through the feds or some other grant programs, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. It goes through our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is East-West Gateway. We compete, we do grant applications. We compete with the 5 Missouri counties. And so we are guaranteed at least one project in each category annually. And we are very diligent about turning in these applications. The process to get these, the process to manage them, and the process to get funding reimbursed is pretty rigorous. But at the end of the day, when someone says to us they'll pay 80% of a project, we are always glad to do whatever work it takes.
So, and I guess the question is like, are these things where they have already said that they are going to pay the 80%, or we're kind of just, are the federal funding freezes and stuff going on right now going to affect any of this at all?
So that's a great question. East-West Gateway, of course, when that conversation came up here within the past week and a half or so, we consulted with East-West Gateway and we asked them that very question. First of all, they told us to keep submitting grants. They said, you know, here's the thing. The administration in Washington, D.C. said they would review all the grants that are given out on any federal programs. Surface transportation programs for highways and bridges and things like that are amongst the highest public safety things the federal government helps with. And so, and I'm not saying there are not others, because there certainly are, but this program has a very good chance of not being messed around with. And so this is one of the things that, you know, we're in this process now. We're talking about this. If you look at the right-hand column, you'll see which ones we already have grants on. You'll see which ones we have recently applied grants for. You know, if something happens, if something changes, we will adjust when that happens. But at the moment, we're still moving full steam ahead, and that is our direction from our MPO.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kay, those are very good questions. Yeah, if you look at the criteria on some of the capital budgets we have, just overall, we try to maximize anytime there's a match or some sort of participation from another source, whether it be the feds or other sources, we always try to go after those, simply just get bigger bang for the buck on that. So yeah, I mean, it's something that's going to have to be monitored going forward, certainly. But yeah, we as Rich said, we'll try to keep plugging through and hope for the best.
So there's a couple questions that are in the chat, and I guess Katie, you asked question: can local match be paid by any other budgets account in the city? The current USD DOT policy secretary said Funds will be restricted for agencies that do not comply with ICE. Does the city comply with ICE? So I can't answer that question. That's above my pay grade. But I know that the directive that I have been given by my boss, which is the mayor's office, the mayor, and our MPO, is to proceed with our grants. So at this moment, that's what we're doing. The other budget part, Paul, do you want to try to answer
Yeah,
that?
I'll jump in on that. Well, technically, the local match may be played from anywhere, but the main factor is budgetary. I mean, you only have so many funds available. I know on the operating budget side, it's going to be pretty tight next year. And so what we have with the capital budget is that we have some dedicated sources that have been allocated towards capital, and that's where we typically go. So while, yeah, you can pay local match from any source which you have available to pay from, the problem more is that it's not available. So that's sort of it's a budgetary constraint rather than anything else. Let me see that.
So, I also want to respond to that and say, Katie, we do work with the alders at times. They do give us funding for local matches. They each get about $820,000, $800,000+ a year. And at times they allocate some of their funding for local matches. The other thing is public-private partnerships. We've entered into a number of those, like when we built the Kings Highway Bridge, by I-44, we entered into a public-private partnership with the Union Pacific Railroad. That project was about a $22 million project. At the end of the day, when it was all cleared and so forth, the city spent about $1 million on it. The UP picked up the vast majority of the local match. So we're always looking for ways to minimize this, but these particular projects that I'm talking about here, there's probably no other local match besides capital. Brian, you asked a question and I want to talk about that one because that's a really good question. So yes, there's been a lot of talk about the Compton Bridge. It is under design. It is 95% completed at this time in design. There are 2 parcels of right-of-way that remain to be picked up. One of those is from Topgolf, and one of those is a parcel of right-of-way from the railroad. The estimated cost for that project came in a little bit north of what we expected it to be. So we're going through a value engineering process right now, trying to get that cost down. And I will also tell you that I know you mentioned that it is in disrepair, but we have done repairs on the joints out there probably 4 times now in the last couple years, just trying to hold that together until we can actually get the bridge under construction. The other alternative would be to close the bridge to vehicle and pedestrian traffic. And of course, that wouldn't bode very well for the neighborhood. It wouldn't bode well for St. Louis University. So we're doing everything we can to hold it together until we can get it under construction. But yes, very much so alive. Okay.
I see a hand raised by Terry Hoffman.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And like Kay Parrish, I'm new to this committee as well. So my question may be a little fundamental for the group, but inquiring minds want to know. So I have 2 questions. So is the ultimate goal of this group to prioritize the $22 million in available funds across the 145 million of critical item projects that that Richard just went over partially, or is there something else that is a part of our fundamental objective here?
Well, your charge basically is to do sort of that, as well as looking at this. I think what this does is, on the critical needs, gives you a context for evaluating. So, but if you have something that says, hey, I believe we should also be looking at these kind of projects as well, you can suggest those as well, and I'm sure, Rich and company will, consider review those. But I think it's
Okay.
important to, but I think it's important to put it all in context.
Okay,
So what this does is gives you that, here's what's out there now, and this is what we consider critical, so that it gives you a little bit of ability to evaluate if you have an idea that might not be
Okay.
on the list.
okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. And then my second question is of all of the the projects, identified in the red column, how many of those do we risk losing any of the matching funds, either from the city or from other third-party funding sources, if we don't fund them from this plan?
That's a great question. So I just covered those. Those would be on A and B under streets and bridges, because that is where our federal highway grants come under, streets and bridges.
Okay,
And those are the
Thank you.
ones, Rich, so the ones that we already have design grants in for, right? Design funding for, right?
Correct. The ones that are in the right column that say we already have design funding for. The other ones we just applied for, so we don't know whether we're going to even get those grants yet.
Okay. Okay, great.
okay, thank you.
Sure. All right.
See a
Let's move
couple
on.
other, yeah, I see it, two more, and then
Oh,
we'll,
I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. What do we got? Let's see. Okay. Okay, this is from Cleo. Who decides transferring of funds if project is completed? If there's funds left over, where does that funding go? Go ahead, Rich.
Yep. So I would tell you that generally that's not the case. Usually what happens is the projects usually either run pretty close to budget or over. Just because they're in a city as old as ours, are usually unforeseens and mitigating things that come up. And we're usually matching that up, trying to get them done with the bit that we have in value engineering, as I just mentioned, Brian, about Compton. If there were additional funding that was left over, what I do is I come back to the capital committee and I usually try to keep it within the same family. So for example, if it's a streets project, I try to come back and ask the capital committee to move whatever residual would be left into another streets type project, our bridge, our parks, our police, our fire, because then it keeps it within the same family. I've never really had a case where that doesn't work, but if it were not to work, I would say what I would ask them to do is put it into a discretionary fund whereby we could utilize it for another grant match or something that came up that failed, that's an emergency, which again, we're not talking about that here tonight, but that does happen time and time again where something fails and we have to go out and perform emergency repairs. But generally it goes to the capital committee or Paul or through the ENA process so that, we're just not unilaterally moving stuff around.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
All right, let's move to the next category.
Let's move on to parks. Okay, so the first item on here is the Parks Maintenance Building at Sherman Park. I want to tell you that on a previous inventory from the Parks Department, they had a $10 million item under Parks Maintenance Buildings because many of the Parks Maintenance Buildings are in disrepair. The overhead doors are broken. The restrooms are just abominable. The windows are broken. The roofs leak, and there are their Parks Maintenance staff who are assigned to work in these every day of the week, just like we all work in our offices. So we found that we asked them to break that down and tell us, what is the worst park maintenance building that you have? And so they came back with Sherman Park. Parks will make a presentation on this, but I will tell you, this building currently is condemned. And so people cannot work out of there. They work out of their vehicles. They store the equipment around the building. They're not in the building, but this building has been condemned. For $750,000, we believe we can restore the building. fencing, overhead doors, tuck pointing, roof, bathrooms and so forth to make it inhabitable again, which is much more cost effective than trying to take down a structure in a park and replace it. All right, the next item is pool renovation. So I want to give you a little bit of history on this one. So, if you don't know this, in the city of St. Louis, there are 7 pools. There are 3 outdoor pools, Marquette, Chambers, and Fairgrounds. And there are 4 indoor pools at Tandy, Wool, Cherokee, and Twelfman Park Rec Centers. So this item started off some time ago, and it was a $7 million item. Previously, we have funded $3 million of pool renovations, so the balance is at $4 million. And so now we still have, to put things into the 7 pools, pumps and tunnel piping and repairs, electrical, pool deck repairs, ADA lifts, all type of things that need to go into these pools that are utilized by all our residents. And so, the actual projects would be prioritized by the Parks Department, depending on how much funding we gave them. Again, in the past, we've done $1 million a shot on it. We could do that again. We could do a couple million. We could do 500,000, but it's one of these things where this is a very highly utilized item by our residents, particularly the youth. And so we need to put funding back into these pools. Soulard Market, this is another one that is a multi-funded source. So this particular item is for $3,552,000. Says miscellaneous building repairs, electrical and plumbing upgrades. This item started off at an $8.5 million item. And we previously put $4,948,000 into projects at Soulard from various funding sources, from capital to use tax, major projects, to economic development, sales tax. And so there are things that are happening. There currently, the boilers in the building have been replaced. That was the very first thing we did because the boilers failed. So that was step number 1. Again, this is one of these items where we could allocate 500,000, $1 million, $3 million, whatever we would see fit to allocate there for a facility that is historic and utilized a lot by our residents. The next item on the list is HVAC upgrades at rec centers. Again, this is one of these things that we have put some funding in before. This was a $6 million item. We funded 1.3 million out of FY25 capital budget. There's 4.7 left. And this is all the other things that relate to HVAC at those rec centers besides the boiler repairs. So if they have air conditioners or radiators or piping distribution systems or anything that has to do anything with the HVAC in those buildings would be prioritized with whatever funding that is allocated out of that account. You flip to the next page. We have number 14, which is Barrett Brothers Park Comfort Station, remove and replace. Barrett Brothers Park is in North City. It is the comfort station, obviously, is the restroom facility in a park utilized by all the people that use that park. The restroom facility there is in total disrepair. The restrooms do not work. They are closed. And so that facility needs to be completely removed and rebuilt. And the estimated cost for that is about $1.2 million. Clifton Heights Comfort Station roof and deck replacement. This is in Clifton Heights Park. Again, another comfort station utilized by the people who use that park. The roof deck and the roofing is in complete disrepair. It is leaking and it needs replacement. And so that cost is $750,000. The O'Fallon Park YMCA parking lot, if you'll remember, the rec centers, both Carondelet and the YMCA, were built around 2009, 2010. So they're up to about 15 years old now. The parking lot at the O'Fallon Park YMCA is an asphalt parking lot. It's rimmed with concrete curbing at the same grade as the asphalt. And then there are rain gardens that separate the parking rows, which is sustainable feature and helps with all the runoff in the park. The parking lot is very raveled and cracked and beat up. It's been patched many, many times. And so this cost here would be to come in and do a mill and resurface of that parking lot. The next item, number 17, repair, replace glass block wall, exterior wall at the Wool Rec Center. 17 and 18, I will tell you, they are both structural issues. They are foundation problems. The building, either the glass block wall or the exterior wall at Cherokee, the walls have sunken and they are cracked. And over the years, it's been fixed with simple masonry repairs or tuck pointing or caulking. And it's a problem with the foundation. So these items are expensive because we need to come in and we need to do a geotechnical investigation of what the soil is, what the problem is, understand what the footing was, possibly do pilings or piers or whatever we would need to do to brace those walls up. Why these become so critical is, and I think you would all understand this, is that they're at rec centers where, a lot of people are in and out. There are a lot of small children, elderly people. Public safety is paramount. If one of these walls were to actually collapse, heaven forbid it would happen during an opportunity when there are a lot of people there, a sporting event, and what it could lead to is a roof collapse or other things. So these are both structural items that we need to do some very deep investigation into. The next one is O'Fallon and Cronolette Park YMCA repairs. Again, I mentioned those are about 15 years old. I'll give you a little bit of information for that $4 million. So the Cronolette Rec Center needs an indoor pool heater. It's currently running on one pool heater, which is not sufficient. Needs 2 domestic hot water heaters. It needs installation of a second fan wall for the pool dehumidification unit to prevent mold. It needs tiling in the women's locker, shower facilities because the paint continually is peeling in there. Needs to cement the outdoor activity area. What that basically is when it was designed and built, there are planting areas which line the lazy river and the pools. And so you get any kind of a windy day. And as you can imagine, all the stuff from the planting areas is in the pool and clogging up the pumps. Needs cement repairs and replacements of the circular drive. Needs an additional pool pump as a spare. The slide tower needs to be sandblasted and painted. The boiler and HVAC have been funded through capital, so we don't need to do that, but also needs a roof replacement. And then at O'Fallon Park, it needs many of the same things, although it is about a 1.5 to 2 years newer than Carondelet. It needs an LED light conversion. It needs new metal detectors. And the big item that it needs is it needs the gym floor completely redone and replaced. Those 2 rec plexes get a lot of use. And so, it's one of these things where we have to keep them up and running. We have to keep, opportunities for our residents to use those. Number 22 is pool fencing for $600,000, and that is for outdoor pools at Marquette, Chambers, and Fairgrounds. Previously, we funded about $550,000 for fencing, and it was not enough to do all of them. So the Parks Department asked that we hold until we get the remaining $600,000. The idea with the outdoor pool fencing is twofold. Most of those fences today are simple chain link fences. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but over the last winter, we had break-ins at Chambers and Fairgrounds Park, and the pool and pool houses were pretty much destroyed by vandalism, easily cutting through chain link fence. So we want to provide nice looking, secure fences to go around these pools, so that somebody who's visiting or in the pool or whatever is not looking at a simple chain link fence, and it also provides a layer of security and protection for those pools. Number 23 is $600,000 for rec center electrical upgrades. That is the rec centers of Gamble, Cherokee, and Booter. And in many of those rec centers, what we've been doing is working with the recreation department to upgrade the electric so they can actually add some computer labs into those rec centers for our residents. So electrical upgrades at those 3 recreation centers. We get to the forestry on page number 8. And so first item on that list is hazardous tree removal. So that one is complete overdue work orders, removal of hazardous trees that are a public safety matter. And the program will help fill the void vacancies in the forestry department. And we have given funding to that in the past, so this is an annual thing we've done. The same thing goes with ash tree removal. We've given funding from capital for that. And that is to reduce the strain on the forestry department by removing dead and dying ash trees due to the emerald ash borer, reducing safety hazard of dying ash trees, dead trees throughout the city, and reduce the species of of ash trees in the city. So that is a $550,000 item. And then item number 5, which is the final parks item, is $40,000. And that is for 1415 North 13th Street parking lot lighting. That is the forestry headquarters building. It is downtown on 13th Street. Basically, there is a lot of break-ins that have happened there in the past. The lighting is insufficient. The vehicles have been vandalized and things have been stolen. So they asked for $40,000 for some new parking lot lighting to provide security, along with a security camera system that we funded in the past year. So that is Parks, Rec, and Forestry. I'll stop if anybody has any questions on that one.
I see Terry's hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, 2 quick questions. So Rich, with respect to the ash tree removal and the hazardous tree removal, the 1.1 and the 0.5, I'm assuming that is citywide, correct? Not
Yes,
just
sir.
neighborhoods?
Yes.
Okay.
Citywide,
'Cause I
yeah, that's a
think-
great question. Citywide,
Okay.
yes.
Because I'm sure every neighborhood has ash trees, and every neighborhood has hazardous trees that need to be removed. Many of them which are probably ash trees. Okay, thank you. And then my second question was with respect to Soulard Market Park. You mentioned originally the funding source started at $8.5 million, and nearly $5 million had been allocated from various sources, and now that whittles the number down to $3.5 million. So has $5 million been, and I know you said that they currently have replaced the boilers at the market, but have they put in $5 million of repairs at the market thus far?
No,
Or is it
so
work
the
that's
boilers
pending?
have been repaired. They're in the process of planning. They're looking at replacing the roof, the fascia, the guttering. They're looking at tuck pointing. They're looking at restroom renovations, plumbing upgrades. There are a number of items that they're getting proposals on and looking at as we speak. I will just mention this, and I don't mean this to be excuse, so if it sounds like one, please don't take it this way, but everybody has been scrambling over the past 6 months trying to get all ARPA funding encumbered so we didn't lose that from the federal government. So it's been a very busy time for a lot of people. They are moving along on things, but the capital funding does not have a sunset provision. So at the end of the day, if it takes a little bit longer and we get a good number and get the work done, we're happy with that.
Okay, so 5 million or 4.9, as you quoted, has been committed and is allocated, and that's primarily from ARPA money, I guess?
No, Actually, I'm looking at here, there was 1,000,005 from capital, half-cent surplus. Previously, there was 1,000,006 from FY 25 capital. There was 1,000,000 from 1/11/10 user tax major projects fund. There was 848,000 from economic development sales tax. So there was actually
Okay.
no ARPA funding that was allocated, Bart.
Okay, so, but 4.9 is allocated, just hasn't been spent, or most of it hasn't been spent. So we're including in this critical list the remaining 3.5. That
Correct.
gets it to the 8 Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I was gonna jump in to say, oftentimes when we get these projects, the first thing that gets done is something that you don't even see, which is, as Rich mentioned, was the boiler, and which is over $1 million
Right.
project. And I'm sort of like you, I was like, when are we gonna see something? So, and then they
Yeah.
sort of migrate up, so that's how that works.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, John, I think you're next.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I'm John's first time on the committee. You mentioned with the wall projects in particular that they sound like big bulk, like priced items, whereas some others you had said that you can allocate 500K even though they're asking for 3 million. Is there a way to like make it clear which ones are most of the money needs to be allocated for this to be worth it at all versus you can get little wins here and there kind of situations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one of the reasons why I've been trying to go through on those and mention those. I think here's the hard struggle that I really have with that. And I just have to tell you, if I went through and told you that you could only fund a portion of it, then I think most of the time you would. And I'd really rather you decide on what you think the need is versus me saying you could get by with funding something. Also, I would tell you the Parks Department would probably love me to say on every one of these that every single dollar in these is needed because they need that. Okay, but here's the problem with it. When we're looking across all the other departments, I have to be very honest and fair with you and tell you that particular items, you could get a little win if you contributed something out of it. Those other two items that you mentioned with the walls, so those are big numbers, and we really don't know what those are going to cost until we actually go out and do a structural investigation, a geotechnical investigation. I don't know what those would cost. We estimate those numbers just looking at them and saying if the whole wall had to be taken down and put back together, what would that cost? How much would it cost to brace, the roof? And so they come out to be really big numbers. At the end of the day, maybe we could just put some piers in the ground and brace this up and get away with, 300,000-400,000. I just can't tell you that without doing the engineering work behind it.
All right, thanks.
Yes, sir.
And Kay, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I put my hand up this time. Um, the YMCA, what is our relationship with them? Are they paying for some of this stuff? Are we breaching a contract if we fail to do these repairs? What is kind of the relationship there, and what are our obligations?
So that is a great question, Kay. And when the parks director presents in a week or so, that's the question I would recommend you ask him. We do have an agreement with them, and we do pay for some things and they pay for things. But since I don't manage that portion of it, I don't want to give you the wrong information. So when Greg Hayes and Kim Hagley present, that's a great question to ask them. They'll give you all the details.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
And by the way, we do expect them at our meeting next week. All right, it looks like for parks, and just we're running long on time here. I hope that's okay. I will promise. I try to promise a good hour and a half meetings at most, but I think we might run a little long. But okay, let's get to the next category.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to give you a little detail because if I just buzz through the items, you don't get a flavor for what they are. So, okay, we're gonna do fire, which is D. So HVAC, plumbing, and upgrades in all fire stations. There are 30 fire stations throughout the city of St. Louis. Most of those have not been renovated since the late 80s, early 90s. And so there are a lot of things that need to be done, whether it's the heating, the air conditioning, the plumbing, and keep in mind, important to keep in mind, those buildings are lived in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So we don't have the option to say, well, there's a restroom or a shower or a heater out. We are constantly responding to these things. And I will tell you, my staff fixes things in my facilities group until they can no longer buy the parts. And in many cases, they manufacture parts themselves, try to adapt parts until it just cannot be done anymore. But all these are on, the brink of needing to be replaced. So I would, on these mission critical facilities, like to get some funding to get in here and start these. To John's point, this is one where if I could get $1 million on it, I could take $1 million and do work, come back at the other $1 million at another point in time. The next one is number 7, replace carpet with vinyl and 16 floors and fire stations. So as I mentioned, there are 30 of them. Some of them have already been converted over to a commercial vinyl grade tile in the bunk hall on the second floor or in the bunk hall on the first floor. Most of them have rolled stock carpeting that was installed, like I said, in the late 80s, early 90s. The carpets are just worn, they're bubbled up, they're trip hazards, and quite frankly, we don't need to have carpet in a fire station. We need heavy-duty vinyl floors that can be mopped and swept and kept clean. The original fire stations had terrazzo floors in them, but terrazzo is just cost prohibitive. So, if we come back in with a heavy duty vinyl, it accomplishes the mission. The next one is item 8, fire station driveway aprons and driveways. This is the actual apron drive that leads from the street into the building. And so our trucks today, most of them are single axle. They are very heavy vehicles, as you can imagine. Many of these driveways and aprons are cracked and broken. And so we need to come in, do concrete removal and replacement. And then item number 12, which is the training tower retrofit. So Jefferson and Cass, the fire department headquarters, behind there is a big, tall concrete building that is used for training. It is a burn building. It was made to light fires in and train firefighters under real circumstances. There are many things with that building that need to be upgraded in order for it to be used properly, safely, and meet all the codes. Today it's partially used. And so for the interest of training our firefighters, that $500,000 represents the upgrades to that facility. You flip to the next page. This is fire department rolling stock. He is probably not going to speak tonight, but Chris Amos, the Commissioner of Equipment Services, who takes care of all the city vehicle maintenance, is on the call. Chris, say hello real quick.
Good evening, everybody. I look forward to talking to you in a few weeks.
And he is going to come in on the 27th, I believe, and talk about all these vehicles. What I do want to tell you on this is that the critical needs for the fire department are $2,498,009. ESD Equipment Services, Chris's organization, recommends $820,000. What that represents is the minimum investment we probably need to put into the fire rolling stock in order to keep it viable. Chris is going to tell you all about it. He's going to tell you about all the fire trucks we have, how an ambulance costs $380,000. A fire truck is over $1 million. And we almost have a reserve fleet of fire vehicles that are 1-to-1 so that we can always keep things in service. So that is fire. Do we want to stop there? You want me to go through police and then stop, Paul?
Keep going through the police, then we'll stop for a bit.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so the police department, which is E. The first one is ESD Equipment Services Fleet Garage. Again, this garage was built in the early 80s, repairs to the HVAC, lighting conversions from T12 to LED. This shop takes care of all the St. Louis Metropolitan Police vehicles takes care of all the ambulances, takes care of all the fire command vehicles. It is a 24/7, 365 garage. It is always open and there's always somebody there working on something. So it's our first responder garage and it needs HVAC and lighting conversions. All right, so let me get my sheet here from the fire police department. So this next one is a forensic lab comparison microscope for 50,000. This is the purchase of a comparison microscope for the firearms section. A microscope is necessary to analyze bullets and casings from one case to another. The firearms section has a staff of 6 examiners. The unit has 4 microscopes to share among 6 examiners. However, only 3 of the scopes were purchased in this decade, and the 4th has exceeded the 10-year life expectancy rule for this equipment, and mechanical failures are often. So this is a replacement for that microscope. The next one is a forensic lab gas chromatograph spectrometer. That's $120,000. That is to purchase the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, GCMS, for the drug section to analyze various controlled substances. It is necessary to identify various chemical substances and is needed to determine if an individual violated the Missouri Controlled Substance Law. So that is that item. And then we go to a series of HVAC equipment. And so if you look on the inventory, I don't necessarily need to read through these, but I think you can kind of get the idea here. These are all big air conditioning, air handling units. This one in particular, 175,000. A 50-year-old unit in poor condition, a 50-year-old HVAC unit, you're not getting parts for. You know, we're cobbling it together to keep it operating. If you flip to page 11 of 19, 42 is a logging recorder. This is at the communications building. See if I have it right up on that one. I do not. This is basically logs the calls which come into the police communications building, and that is beyond its useful life. That building was also built in the late 80s, early 90s, so much of the equipment over there is all original to the building. Then we go down to page number 12. At the bottom, there are 3 HVAC units on that page that need to be replaced. You know, those 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 40-year-old units in poor condition and the costs associated with each. Flip to page number 13 and 19. You're looking down, you have another HVAC unit, which is 40+ years old. Water pressure plumbing in the academy, which is the plumbing, much of that is original to that facility as well. Then you go back to cooling towers, AHU, which is air handling units, RTUs, which are rooftop units, and you can look in the right-hand column and you can see how big they are, how old they are, and what condition they are in. So that just a lot of HVAC type equipment there that needs to be replaced in that facility. Then we have SLMPD headquarters, which is on Olive Street. They're asking for security upgrades to the lobby. And basically what I can just tell you is today, you'll walk into the lobby and it's relatively open, and they're looking for a design and a build out of something that is much more secure, that is user-friendly, works for the public as well as the police department. And then the communications building, this is a partial radio system replacement for $3 million. And that one, I would like to tell you about that one, because that one's a little more detailed. The manufacturer, which is Motorola, announced that the city's current 18-year-old radio communication system will reach the end of support in 2029. This request begins a multi-year purchase to systematically replace all the items that will reach their end of life in 2029. The city's radio communication system will remain viable through the next decade, providing life and mission critical communications for police, fire, and EMS who rely on the radio communication system for their safety and the public safety. In addition to that, on that 800 meg system, the city agencies also rely on this network for communications with the federal, state, and regional first responders. So that is a radio upgrade, update to that system. So one more page, if you flip over, will be the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department vehicles. And again, Chris will talk about that in detail on the 27th. But the critical needs for that are $4,888,326. Equipment Services recommends that $3,700,000 is funded for that particular item. And, you know, I will tell you that police and fire, just a general comment, that we have funded a lot of different vehicles for police and fire out of different funding sources, ARPA funding sources, general obligation bonds, capital fees, wherever we can. But what you have to remember about those vehicles are, and what Chris will tell you better than me, is that those vehicles never stop running. We have ambulances that we have replaced the engines in 3 times because the vehicles never stop running. So let me stop there. Fire and police, any burning questions you guys have that I can try to answer?
All right.
Ben?
Yeah, we'll get more detail, obviously, when Chris presents on the.
Yes, and that's why I really would like Chris to talk about vehicles, because it is a big dollar item. And there are a lot of questions I'm sure you would like to have answered on that. Let's go to F, corrections and other public safety. So there are 2 items in CJC, and what I would tell you is this: yes, they are on the critical list, but if you'll look at my notes in the right-hand column, I think those 2 items, even though they're critical, there are something that need to be tabled at the moment. The mayor just hired a new corrections commissioner, and I really think it would be fair for us to work with him on what he would like to see done there. We also have a jail grant from the state of Missouri for 4 items above, which we're working through now to see what we get done there. One of those components is HVAC equipment and replacements. If there's any funding left, there may be some funding to take care of some items related to number 7. So I'm asking if at this time, if those 2 items, keep them in mind, but let's just keep those on hold for the moment. Next item on the list is the public safety answering point. And so I do want to take a few minutes and talk about this. But this is actually the 911 center. You probably saw it on the news. So this is a new state-of-the-art emergency communication facility for 911 emergency call taking, dispatching functions for police, fire, emergency medical services, EMS, the Office of Violence Prevention, and hosting the city's emergency management agency, SEMA, along with the city's emergency operations center, the EOC. The facility will be built on the west end of the existing St. Louis City Fire Department headquarters at Jefferson and Cass. This is an essential mission critical facility that will support day-to-day operations and emergency stand-up operations, associated technology, and infrastructure to sustain 365, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week operation and support of all first responder agencies under extreme conditions. The new facility will serve the city's current needs and is designed to accommodate future expansion and evolution in technology if it is required. The new facility is approximately 28,000 square foot and will include 44 telecommunication stations and all the support station spaces that are needed. The project is a result of a study commissioned by the City of St. Louis in 2008, which reviewed economic, operational, and technical feasibility of forming a joint inter-city communications center. So this project began in April of 2019 with the selection of an architectural firm. They did a feasibility report, they did a design, and we have selected a contractor to build it. Now, The project is estimated at about $51 million. And so to date, we have funding of 41.25 million. We have funding from EcoDevo funds, economic development. We have ARPA funding, and we have a $10 million state grant from the Missouri State Department of Public Safety. So what that brings us to is a remaining balance of $10 million. I do want to tell you, we are under construction and we are breaking ground and we are building the facility. The $10 million that is in this particular capital request takes care of the interior technology and fixtures and furnishing of that facility. Remember, I said there are ARPA funding that are involved in this. So that means we have to spend the ARPA funding before December of 26. So this capital funding, we can still put this $10 million together. We have some other sources we will look at as well. And that will be the tail end of this project once the building is built and we retrofit it out with all the 911 call taking, answering technology. So that is some details on the PSAP. And let me stop with that one because that was a mouthful and see if anybody has any questions on corrections or public safety. Okay,
All right.
let's go to G, which is other municipal buildings. Get my sheets here. Okay, so these are a myriad of all different city buildings that are on the list. You'll look at the first page, there's really nothing critical on there. But it does give you a flavor of some of the 160 plus buildings that the city owns and some of the needs that are associated with them. So if we flip to page 17 of 19, we're going to talk first of all about the civil courts building. So the first item that is on the list is a new water service. And so what that particular item is the water lines in the building that feed that building are all original to that building. Probably going on somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 years old. The lines at the Carnahan Courthouse and juvenile detention both had severe main breaks, water line breaks recently, causing flooding, and they have been replaced in the last 3 years. So what we are doing is using that as an opportunity to say it's probably time, and noticing some leaks in this line that we replace that water service. I did skip one at the top of the list. Item number 2, the basement toilet room ventilation. So that one is basically there are toilet rooms in the sub basement of the civil courts building. It's an extremely pricey item to get the ventilation in those restrooms to meet code requirements because there's no way to get the ventilation and get the outside makeup air into those rooms easily. So that's why that particular item is so expensive of $900,000. Item number 8, which is sound Wi-Fi upgrade. This is in courtrooms. So this particular item is, in conjunction with another item that we have on the next page. It's $1 million has been funded for an FY25, needed for the upgrade of 31 courtrooms, phase project, 5 to 7 courtrooms at a time. So again, on this particular item, and I'll mention this in the circuit court, it's somewhat of a duplicate, but it's a little more technology related. We have funded $1 million towards courtroom upgrades in the circuit court. And this appears actually in both the civil courts and in the Carnahan Courthouse. So they're not redundant items, but they do relate to each other. The next item is number 10, which is new revolving doors in the civil courts building. And that particular item is the revolving doors are unable to be repaired due to their age and outdated parts. New door is required. And if you'll notice that I put in the right-hand column there to remind myself and you that revolving doors are on big buildings like these courts buildings because they're there for HVAC pressurization and airlock of the building to control the heat and cooling. With the amount of people that come and go from those buildings every minute of every day, you could never keep temperatures where they need to be. So those provide an airlock. And so those revolving doors, they're asking those to be replaced at $100,000. The next one is 13, 14, and 15, which are all companion items. And those are renovations to the civil courts building on the exterior of the structure. And so what I would say on that one is, if I have any kind of a little write-up on that one. We have been working with the courts, and these are the additional funds that were identified for project number 1. So 825,000 is what is needed at the moment. And this is all exterior stone masonry repairs to a building that has face panels. Many of these face panels have moved and shifted. They are tied into the interior of the structure with steel straps on the back. The building is architecturally beautiful, but it is a high maintenance masonry facility. So the way these lay out is this. These are 3 items that are 13, 14, and 15, phase 1, 2, and 3. So phase 1 would be done hopefully this year. Phase 2 would be 1 to 3 years following. And then phase 3, within the next 1 to 3 years. Phase 3 would be in the next 3 to 5 years. So when you look at those 825, 6.2 million, and 3.5 million, you're looking at 825 this year, 6.2 in the next 1 to 3 years, and 3.5 in the next 3 to 5 years. So they're all critical. They're all public safety items. God forbid one of those panels would come off of the building and fall down onto the street. It would not be good, but at least at 825, we have pretty well handled most of the critical items that are need to be addressed immediately. And then item number 16, which is a building fan coil replacement. And that item is there are the units that are commonly these units commonly leak in all the divisions, court divisions, and offices around the building. Repair or replacement these fan coil units, preventive maintenance for the 574 fan coil units in the civil courts building. And I will tell you that if they are leaking, they need to be replaced. So it is a lot of them. Again, it's $875,000. There are 574. So by the theory that if we did something on it, it'd be better than nothing. But probably what I would tell you is we put out a package that's relatively substantial. So in my mind, I would think on something like this, you'd probably need $250,000 minimum to have any kind of a substantial project to get this thing moving. So that is civil courts building. We'll move to the Carnahan building. All right, and so the Carnahan Courthouse, the first item on that list is again, replace water supply piping, $4.5 million. This is a different item. This one is replace stack and waste supply piping throughout the building. There are 26 stacks within the building, and we can replace them one by one. This is waste pipe stack piping. And so on something like this, again, this would be something that we could separate this down into probably a couple of $300,000 project at a time, 500,000, and we could do these individually. But when you make it a bigger project, you get more bang for your buck. You normally get a better contracted price. Item number 2, replace revolving doors at the Carnahan Courthouse, same as above at the civil. They're outdated. The parts are not available. They need to be replaced. HVAC pressurization and airlock. At the bottom is number 14, repair Market Street entrance steps. And that one is the steps are very deteriorated and they're a hazard to the public if not repaired. That's concrete removal and replacement generally. Typically when you do concrete repairs on steps where usually a lot of de-icing salts are thrown, they don't work very well. So we would probably come in and piece at a time replace those. So $150,000 to replace those steps. Flip to the next page. This is the one I talked about, the courtroom modernization. This goes hand in hand with that Wi-Fi upgrade on the other project. The other one's a little more technology located than this one. This one is basically upgrades to the actual room, the lighting, the fixtures and so forth to make our courtrooms modernized. And so again, there are 31 courtrooms and that would upgrade all the appurtenances in there. And previously this was a $8.4 million item. We put $1 million towards it. This is one of those items we could put, another $1 million with and, do a couple courtrooms, few courtrooms at a time, depending on how the bids come in. So the $1 million that we've already given for this, the courts are in the process now of getting bids and proposals to see how much they can get done for $1 million. So this would be one we could partially fund. Number 8 is the Family Court and Juvenile Detention Center. This is fence, gate, key card, striping, stripping outdoor yard and lot security upgrades. This project allows juveniles to access the outdoor area securely, adds secure parking lot for the 24/7 staff. And it is something that has been requested before, but I believe we had currently done a small EWA project over there for about $155,000, but this would do the remaining work on that particular item. And then we go to ITSA. Excuse me, I skipped one. Modernized detention elevator, which is number 9. And so that one is acquiring parts is very difficult on obsolete elevators. I can tell you we've had this problem on all of our elevators here in City Hall, 1520 Market, the police department, and a myriad of other buildings. And at some point, you just can't get the parts for them anymore. And so you wind up replacing the entire car and track and all the devices because they need to meet all the safety requirements and you just can't get those parts anymore. So that is the elevator at the juvenile detention. So let's go to ITSA. ITSA, which is our technology group. What am I saying here, Paul? What is ITSA?
Information Technology Services,
you.
yeah, they're the ones that do our computer and networking.
Thank you. I had a brain freeze there. Information Technology Group. Thank you. Which today, none of us can live without computers and all this stuff. And obviously everything depends on it. So their first request is a switch network recapitalization, which is $150,000 annually. And so, let's see here. This is switch network recapitalization. This is to poor user experience, vulnerability of network due to manufacturer no longer supporting devices, degrading network performance and increased likelihood of a major outage. Cyber audits identify end-of-life equipment as being significant. The upgrade is necessary to accommodate higher speed networking, Wi-Fi, voice over IP, and replacement of end-of-life switches. As identified, it requires the recapitalization of core switches. ITSA maintains over 400 switches. This request funding is for the replacement of 20% of those devices. And so this is a multi-year request. 600,000 is the the total amount, it's actually $150,000 a year for 4 years. So this is one that we could fund $150,000 and start off with that, or we could fund the entire project. ITSA Cisco core switch replacement, $300,000. The core switch is the main network communication hub for the city government offices. It goes end of service on 10/31 of 25. Replacing the core switch this fiscal year will allow us to stay current with secure switching technology and have the equipment that has service and maintenance included. And that is a $300,000 item. And then the last is from ITSA is a Hyper-V server replacement. And that is all city network storage, website, and IT services rely on server nodes, quicker server response time, enhanced user experience, improve uptime, and Dell warranted maintenance on devices. If the production stack goes offline, all IT services will go down, rendering the city IT useless until parts are found, maintenance tech located, etc. The city maintains a 7-node Hyper-V stack. The oldest of these devices are nearing their end of support, requiring third-party warranted service for parts and repair. All right. And then we'll flip over to page 19 of 19. And we have a couple of additional items here. We have the circuit attorney, which is a renovation of restrooms. And so what that is circuit attorney's office employs more than 130 individuals and is visited daily by members of the public, including members of the judiciary, elected officials, community leaders, and crime victims and witnesses. Currently, the 4th floor restrooms in the Carnahan Courthouse require significant upgrades to work to ensure they are functional, safe, and reflect the professional standards of this office. The capital request amount includes funding for flooring, lighting, and all plumbing and fixture upgrades, including painting. They've attached some photographs. And that is what that one is. That is a restroom upgrade for the circuit attorneys. And then the next one is BWC integration infrastructure, new software server. BWC is body worn cameras. I don't have a write-up on that one, but is an IT item to integrate these body worn cameras with their software. And my assumption would be is that when they use these items to produce video for their attorneys or for court or for their proceedings, that they would have to all communicate with each other. So that would be that integration. And then the telecom system replacement. This particular item we have funded in the past. And so that was originally a $5.234 million project. We have funded $1.774 million from ARPA and $2.7 million from previous capital requests. The ask is for $800,000. This is the telephone upgrades to the Plexar, from Plexar to hosted voice services for the downtown campus, including the following locations: City Hall, Forestry, 1520 Market, Carnahan Courthouse, Juvenile Annex, Communications, Juvenile Center, Civil Courts, the Gateway Transportation Center, the Morgue, the Municipal Garage, the Board of Elections, and the Building Division on Broadway. By upgrading the Plexar to hosted voice systems, HVS, the city will realize a savings of approximately $60,000 per month. Currently, we pay about $90,000 with the HVS to cost, and the cost is $30,000. Let's see, and that is the write-up I have, and that's a replacement of all the phone systems by the comptroller's office, and they're asking for $800,000. So let's stop there for a second. Questions on other municipal buildings?
Yeah,
Yep.
Rich, I'm gonna suggest, we've got the last two categories are vehicles, right?
I'll
And,
just read them real quick if you want me to.
well, yeah, I just very quickly, because I'd like to, I want a hard stop at 7:30.
Sure, I get it. So H1 is other city vehicles. This is any other rolling stock besides the emergency police and fire vehicles. So could be snow plows, could be traffic division vehicles, could be anything other than emergencies, other than refuse, which is covered on H2, and that's your refuse vehicles. So H1, everything public works fleet besides refuse, critical needs are 26.7 million. ESD recommends 13 million. And then on H2, the refuse fleet, the critical needs are 491.6, $491,000, and ESD recommends a total funding of let's see, $2 million. So I'm gonna leave it at that and see if there's, let you wrap up or what questions might
Yeah.
be.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, that's a lot of material. Is there any other questions regarding any of that latter stuff that we covered? Okay, great. Well, again, I know this was a lot of material to cover and we went long today, but I just hope that you find that useful and just providing some context. Again, we will have some discussions in detail about some of these categories. Next week, we do have the Parks Department is going to come in and go into some of their projects. I will point out, let me pull up if I can, on the website here, if I can. If you go to the Budget Division website and you pull up the Budget Division and go under through Capital Committee, you will see all the information that's been, all the agendas and the information that we've talked about today will be posted. Also, I did one housekeeping thing. We were scheduled for all Thursdays. We did have on our meeting on the week of the 18th and through 20th. We're looking to reschedule that meeting that was originally scheduled for Thursday the 20th to Tuesday the 18th. So if you'll note that one. Like I said, next week we hope to gather here same time at on February 13th for the parks. Subsequent to that, we'll have a streets discussion on the 18th, and then we can talk about fleet on the 27th. That's the plan anyway. So without any other business, I thank you again for your participation. Thank you for indulging us going a little long tonight, and we hope to see you next week.